Caller, I want us to speak about what's happening between Kenya and Tanzania, and we begin by hearing from the persons that were denied entry into Tanzania. They came back yesterday in the afternoon, and they had this to say.
We got there at 2:30 a.m. and that's when we were detained. So from 2:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. We were not told why we were detained. Walikuwa wanasema kuna changamoto.
Hapa Afrika Mashariki tunapiga hatua nyingi kurudi nyuma sisi katika masuala ya demokrasia na haki za binadamu.
Why would a whole state have a list or mark activists coming into the country to stop us from attending Tundu Lissu's case? So I'm asking what Samia is scared of.
All right, so they came back. They are not very happy. Obviously, you'd expect that. But the president of Tanzania has been speaking and calling out on Kenyans, saying that they should not be allowed to go and disrupt matters in Tanzania because it remains the only stable country. Listen to what she says.
Tumeanza kuona mtiririko au mwenendo wa wanaharakati ndani ya region yetu hii kuanza kuvamia na kuingilia mambo yetu huku. Sasa kama kwao wameshadhibitiwa, wasije kutuharibia huku. Tusitoe nafasi. Walishaharibu kwao, walishavuruga kwao. Nchi iliyobaki haijaharibika. Watu wako na usalama na amani na utulivu ni hapa kwetu. Kuna majaribio kadhaa. Niwaombe sana vyombo vya ulinzi na usalama na nyinyi wasimamizi wa sera zetu nje kutoa nafasi kwa watovu wa adabu wa nchi nyingine kuja kutovuka hapa kwetu.
All right, you must admire the Swahili there, but Prof, talk to us, because there has been expectations, and we'll be hearing from the Principal Secretary of Foreign Affairs in Nairobi, sort of saying that yes, a country has the freedom to deny entry, but also the East African Protocol requires that there's that free movement of people and goods. What should Kenya do at this time?
One has to understand the context of the contestation. It's between who and who. I think in the context of a country having the leverage or the freedom or the discretion on who to allow in and out, one also has to consider the existing law. And the existing law, the East African, the treaty establishing East Africa Community, together with the protocol, the whole vision was to allow the free movement of people, labor, and goods. And we have seen this, Martha Karua was going there to offer perhaps legal services or even solidarity as a part of enjoyment of her rights and fundamental freedoms. But I think Kenya is certainly not part of this conflict. Kenya is certainly not part of this contest. The contest is actually between Tanzania and East Africa's citizens, because we are one citizen considering the treaty establishing the East Africa Community. And the contest is that of Samia Suluhu's agnosticism to human rights, freedoms, and democracy, which is exceedingly surprising, actually. It's exceedingly highly surprising because, you know, Tanzania has not been known to this kind of politics. Right. And one wonders why Samia Suluhu is actually scared of the politics of contestation and protestation. In Tanzania, the Chama cha Mapinduzi is still largely a dominant party in that country, and it certainly is not going away anytime soon. Secondly, Tanzanians have been known to be what we call docile bodies. You know, they are not known to the kind of firebrand politics that we have in our country. On the other hand, so that's what Samia Suluhu is scared of, the kind of transnational political activism that is being exported from Kenya in the persons or personages of Martha Karua and former Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya, Willy Mutunga, who's my mentor and my personal friend. But I think Tanzania has to recognize that, you know, by resisting democracy, human rights, you know, free speech, they're actually doing themselves a greater harm than good. Because it has been known that, democracy that thrive, particularly that brings economic development, has to accept some level of plurality of ideas. Considering particularly that, CCM is still a behemoth, and particularly will not be going away anytime soon. I would understand, for instance, if Museveni was to resist the entry into that country of Martha Karua, Willy Mutunga, because of legitimacy questions. I think in Tanzania, the ruling party or the current president, Samia Suluhu, is still not yet at the level of legitimacy, such that if there is to be any kind of oppositional politics, she has to be, this resistant and repulsive.
What do you mean she's not at the level of legitimacy?
Illegitimacy, sorry. She's not yet at the level of illegitimacy compared perhaps to that of the Ugandan president. And so I do not...
Who has also been... okay, let me start afresh. Who has also been popularly elected?
I mean, popular election. I think in Uganda,
actually, both are elected.
It's a facade.
Yeah.
Samia Suluhu is not yet elected. But I think, because this is the first time she's going to face her election.
Yeah.
But there is really no ground for her to be repulsive, and recalcitrant to alternative ideas that are coming out from other parts of the country, because her party is still largely dominant. And I say that is different from Uganda, where the president faces some legitimacy questions. In Tanzania, there's not yet any legitimacy questions. So this kind of agnosticism to democracy and human rights is actually unwarranted. It's actually unwarranted. It's a disservice to the people of Tanzania and to the people of East Africa community.
Okay. Senator Maina, what's your take? What should government do?
I think, first of all, to access a nation or to have the freedom to move into a country which is not your original state, you require their permission or what you would call a visa.
Yep.
And they admit based on, it is their right, it's their discretion to admit. And in admitting a foreigner or a person from a different nation, then they'll be looking at the purpose for which you're visiting. So you'll find many times they'll ask you, what's the purpose that you want to access the nation for? And that is within the rules, it's within their right. So maybe what could have deterred the admission or caused trouble or obstacle to the admission was the fact that maybe because they were intending to go and support the opposition candidate, this gentleman, Tundu Lissu.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the purpose that caused that. And you see, in Kenya, we have certain rights.
Yeah.
And Kenyans have a lot of freedoms based on our Constitution 2010. And the way we do our politics here is very different with the way Uganda is doing their politics.
Yeah.
Tanzania is doing their politics. Rwanda is doing their politics. These are growing democracies. And all these nations around Kenya are at different levels. The level of expression which is in Kenya, many people who come from Uganda, from Tanzania, they always comment and say, you people have too much freedom. You can almost say anything you wish to say on media waves, and you seem to have rights you're really enjoying, constitutional rights. But that is why when it comes to the politics of even with the treaty, even with the East African Community Treaty, you find that, yes, there is freedom of movement of persons and goods. But when you come to the politics of the moment, for instance, to ask yourself the question, is it possible for East Africa to have one president? I don't think nations are ready yet at this stage, because our levels of growth of democracy are different. And that's why you find,
Senator Maina,
that's why you find...
What should the government of Kenya do today? Because of this reality.
Because of that reality.
Yeah.
I think if somebody is coming to Kenya and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decides they do not want the person to access Kenya, that decision rests with the state. Their sovereignty demands that they are the ones to admit or not admit. Maybe what they were going to do was not a bad thing. According to, their levels of professionalism, they were protecting an opposition leader just like their opposition leaders, and would look for support if they needed support when they are in trouble. But for the government of Kenya, What we should be asking the question is, when you send them away, there has to be disclosure. What is the likely reason why you've been repulsed or expelled or refused entry?
Let's hear from the Principal Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Korir Sing'oei, on what he thinks should happen.
As government, we are under an obligation to be able to speak out when our citizens are, are apprehended in particularly high, persons, and therefore we would want to understand what could have, led to this situation. Vis-a-vis our neighbors, I think we are way ahead in the liberalization journey, but we must allow our neighbors to also evolve. We cannot impose our, and project the way we run our democratic order on our neighbors. We've got to be careful.
That's what I'm saying. You see.
Yeah.
Our levels of democracy, we are at different stages of democracy. And they have a right to determine who accesses or not. Okay. But the one thing that should be done, the honorable thing that should be done by a neighbor, is to, for instance, if we buy you, we think Sam Gituku is going to cover some events in Tanzania, and that authority is not comfortable with Sam and Citizen going into Tanzania. On a bare minimum, they should be able to explain to Sam, you cannot access this because we do not want this level of coverage, or we don't like the way maybe Citizen is running its shows or something like that. So they should be able to explain so that the citizens understand, even as we are being sent back, this is the reason why we are being deported, because being deported is a very serious thing. For sure. Could be held against you by another country where an application is being done by on a visa application. You'll be asked questions like, have you ever been deported? Have you ever been arrested for an immigration crime? And you don't want that area to be left in a hazy manner.
Okay,
yes.
Now there are a few issues, Kabaka, there are a few issues that the PS raises. He says the government, in this case government of Kenya, is under an obligation. But in the same sentence goes ahead to say, we would want to understand. So where does obligation run? And where does...
First and foremost...
Because it feels like the country, the government is not moving. Yet you find the affected president is speaking about those people in an internal forum.
What baffles us is that Sing'oei, Kenya, does not know why my party leader was deported. The Tanzanian government has not communicated as to why. Was it because of public security? Was it because she was going to spread diseases, maybe public health? We don't know why she was deported. And we must categorically and strongly condemn what happened. The detainment and eventual deportation of my party leader was uncalled for. And the irony is that she was being deported from an airport named after a father of East Africa, Nyerere. Someone who was known to have said freedom is not something that one person can wander around and say, Sam, I'll give you freedom, but Prof, you won't get freedom. Freedom is absolute. Freedom is divine. So when they do this to my party leader in such an establishment, and by a leader who grew through the ranks of they call it agitation, but activism, but I call it liberation, in Zanzibar, to the point where she is today. It's very unfortunate. And when Sing'oei says that we need to wait for people to evolve, liberation doesn't wait for people to evolve. The liberation time is now. East Africa.
But you can't push it to a neighbor.
We are not forcing. Let me tell you now, for example, you see what the president is saying, that they're coming to force ideas on us. It's the same as when your parents, you say that your child, you don't want to accept that your child is naughty. You want to ascribe the naughtiness being influenced by a certain child, a friend of them. No. It's the Tanzanian people who are calling for this agitation. You saw the crowds. April, I believe it was in April when Tundu Lissu was about to be captured by the state. You saw the crowds. They are calling for liberation. No reforms, no elections. So this liberation talk is emanating from the Tanzanian people themselves. My party leader, if you may ask me what she was going there to do, she was invited by an arm of the EAC, the East African Law Society, just a sister organization that works with them, to go and observe, not participate, observe not represent, observe. And this was in the open. As Senator was saying, it was in the open. There were letters written, requests that you are coming. We'll come on this day. This is what we're coming to do. And they were allowed and invited.
But they accredited.
And they were accredited.
That should be the next
You see,
question.
and they were accredited because you can't get to Tanzania and you're a guest of East Africa Law Society and you're not accredited. So what changed? What changed? Let me tell you what changed.
Which authority was issuing the accreditation?
Because up to now, we've not been told of any accreditation.
Sorry, Kabaka.
Accreditation in terms of?
You said
they were accredited by observers. They were guests of East African Law Society. So Law Society is the one that called them, accredited the access and the observing of the law case. The case.
To travel to Tanzania, you don't need a visa. You just need
a
passport.
You're just a passport. Still your identity. But before you do that, you have to tell the state what you're going to do. And that was done through East African Law Society, and they were accepted. What's changed? Let me tell you what changed. What's changed is the amount of awareness they realized that was created. And the success that we're seeing today after the deportation of all those that were deported is that the world now knows who Madam Suluhu is. The amount of abductions that have happened, the case that is being politically instigated against Lissu.
Okay. Mheshimiwa Wendeto, what's your take on all these matters? Because it's coming at a time that Kenya has also been on an effort to liberalize how visitors get into the country. We now have electronic travel advisory that, authorization that was introduced by President William Ruto. But also, President William Ruto chairs the EAC summit, isn't it?
Yes, he does.
What should he do at this time?
Thank you, Sam. And maybe just in terms of a little background, the EAC Treaty and the Common Markets Protocol, there are several things that very, very explicitly provides for rights and movements and things like that. And Article 104 of the EAC Treaty, it talks about that partner states shall adopt measures, to achieve a freedom of movement of persons. It also talks about the right to enter, reside, and stay in any partner state. Article 6 also upholds the issues of good governance, rule of law, democracy, and human rights. And also to remember that EAC is a signatory to the African Charter of Human Rights. So we are also a signatory to that. And the other sad thing is that this happened in Tanzania. Why is Tanzania significant? It is a HQ of the East Africa community. It is the seat of the East Africa Parliament. It is a seat of the East Africa Court of Justice. What we are seeing happening, and some of you have, I'm sure you have many friends from the wider East African region. Let me just use here the wider East African region. Almost all the East Africa community states, and I think right now there are 7 or 8, they've increased. And if you have friends there, they all really, really admire the freedoms, just like Veronica has said, the freedoms that we as Kenyans enjoy.
Yep.
And many of them long for the day their countries will reach the level of human rights, the level of respect for rule of law that Kenya has reached. And that's why Kenya, we have to constantly guard these freedoms. And we are seeing some political bad manners spreading in our region. Let me just be honest. As we speak, and that's why, again, I've said I'm talking about the wider East African state, you can almost quote that in every state there is some opposition leader, either in jail, under house arrest, or exiled, or suffering one form of prosecution and persecution or another in a court of law, be it a normal court of law or a martial court of law. So there's a lot of lack of democratic hygiene.
Apart from Kenya?
That is being seen. I'm coming to Kenya. That is being seen in the region. And the reason we as Kenyans are, like I said, we have to guard this very carefully, is that, bad manners spread very quickly. They say bad company corrupts good morals, isn't it? Yeah. Show me your friends, and I'll show you what sort of person we are. So as Kenya, we have to be careful that these issues that we are seeing in our region do not happen here. We have seen an attempt just this week at cracking down on opposition figures, which is very sad. Just this week. I think it's in the papers today, it was in the papers yesterday, and there is an attempt. It may not have reached the level of that we are seeing in those countries, but when a major opposition figure alleges attempts to maybe plant arms, attempts to poison, arbitrary invasion of private property, again we start seeing some not so good responses. But Sam, to your point, I listened to the response from the Principal Secretary. And, other than the interesting accent, I would say it's a bit weak. I would have expected a very, very strong condemnation of what happened to our leaders. Yeah. They have now been branded Mutiririko of activists, yeah? Would have expected a very, very strong response coming from Kenya, not to sound like we do not know or like we do not understand, but to call it out as it is, that look, you are in breach of the East African Community Treaty. You are in breach of the Common Market Protocol. These people are not criminals. They were actually not even going for work, like you are saying. They were actually going to observe, what is going on. So I would expect the ministry to come out, maybe the CS, and possibly even the head of state, to call this out and say, you know what, this is not what we signed up for. Right. On this one, our brothers and sisters, we call you to order. Thank you.
What is fascinating, and I want to hear from Prof first, Senator. What is fascinating is that the former Chief Justice, former Chief Justice Willie Mutunga was denied entry, but the immediate former Chief Justice David Maraga was allowed entry, and he has come out and given a statement saying that we are proud of Tanzania's history of standing in the gap for fellow Africans in ideology and through intellectual investment. The country has the TCDC College in Arusha that is globally known for its excellence education in matters Pan-African, justice and democracy, but complains that the shrinking civic and democratic spaces in East Africa should be of concern to all of us. The rapidly increasing trend of abductions, arbitrary arrests, detentions and extrajudicial killings undermines the welfare of our African Jumuiya. So really, yes, he was allowed entry, but he's also citing the question that it is not fair for some of these senior officials or senior leaders from Kenya to be denied entry. If you are the president today, because the Prime Cabinet Secretary, who is also the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, has been quiet through it all. The President of Kenya has been quiet, and he chairs the summit of the East African Community. What would you do?
I would understand the context of all this conflict, and it's not a diplomatic conflict. This is more in the realm of a dispute between a private citizen and another state. And globally, all over, it happens all the time. I mean, America can decide to deport a citizen or deny entry to a citizen. It doesn't become a diplomatic issue, unless, of course, if it involves senior and serious government officials. The other context in which we have to understand this is, at least politically, and the world over, political administrations are always interested in self-preservation. In the cause of the interest in self-preservation, they will always brook no challenge, whether that challenge has a domestic roots or an international roots. In the context of Tanzania, and I think this is how they understand this thing, and you have heard there the president saying that wanaharakati wanaingilia mambo yetu. Wakati ambapo wamedhibitiwa. I hope kudhibitiwa means they have been controlled in their own countries. And I think that is not quite correct, because Kenya has a different kind of highly volatile and versatile political activism that cannot be restrained even by the government. And I think that is what she cannot accept. So the dispute is largely between a private citizen, however they are ranking, William Mutunga, the former Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya. Martha Karua has been a leading government official for many years. But that does not make it, a state-to-state dispute. Mm-hmm. What it is that we have an emerging trend of transnational political activism. And I think we can give credit to Martha Karua for that, because she is one of the leading Kenyan figures who has exported that brand of activism to Uganda. In what we can call the East Africa's most leading autocracy, the kleptocracy as well. She has done the second step of exporting that kind of firebrand transnational politics into Tanzania. And we can understand, the kind of resistance that is coming from the Tanzanian state. So let us leave this, let us put this away from a state-to-state dispute. Let us look at it from a political prism. The fact that Samia Suluhu is still a very, very young president, politically not strongly rooted, and she fears challenge, particularly if this challenge is coming from a strong democracy such as Kenya, as we understand that they are still having evolving standards of democracy. So, but that should not, that approach from the Tanzanian side must take into cognizance the fact that we have fundamental rights and freedoms and the tenets of democracy that have been entrenched in the East Africa community law. I'm certain and sure that even Suluhu Hassan may not want this to be done to any of Tanzania's citizens, however the motive and objective of coming to Kenya or into Uganda. Tanzania has not yet reached a stage where we have a formidable opposition. As I said, in Tanzania, the opposition is still largely weak, and I really do not understand this kind of strong resistance to oppositional ideas that are coming from our neighbors or even from within. CCM is still strongly dominant, and I think she needs to understand that.
Okay, all right. And I want to transition to the